My name is Dave Feudy. I am the museum manager here. On your seats, you found information about membership. We are a private nonprofit museum that has been in this location since 1983. The museum's been in Colorado Springs since 1970. As a private nonprofit, we receive no state or federal funding, so it's memberships and donations, grants, and other forms of income that help us do these types of programs for free for the public. So we thank our members who are in the audience, and those who are not members, please consider membership, as that helps support our educational programming. If you're so inclined to support our educational programming, we have a very nice gift shop. You can get something on your way out after you enjoy this panel discussion, and those proceeds again help our educational mission here. We see over 5,500 students through school tour programs throughout the year, as well as thousands of visitors throughout the year, both internationally and nationally and local. So we do have quite a presence locally as well as a draw nationally to this community. If you're interested in volunteering, Audrey Gregg is our volunteer coordinator. Audrey's in the back in the black shirt there. We have a number of opportunities that we're developing. So if you're interested in volunteering, please contact the museum. Upcoming events, we have Senior Mondays that go through March. So on every Monday in February and March, seniors get admitted for $2.50, and a senior to us is anyone who's 60 years or older. So $2.50 on Mondays. Our next main event is a Family Exploration Day. That is on March 10th, and it goes from 10 to 3. We have 3 historic interpreters, people who are going to represent individuals from history. We have Dr. Charles Gardner, who is going to do his name is John Stansfield, who is going to portray Dr. Charles Gardner. Dr. Gardner was an early Colorado mining camp doctor and advocate of fresh air cure for tuberculosis. So he did his work here in Colorado Springs. We also have a Black Forest resident, Tricia Dutting. She's going to be performing the rags to riches story of Baby Doe Tabor. And then we have author Nancy Oswald, who will recreate characters from her children's/teen book called Rescue in Poverty Gulch. So we have those 3 individuals that day. On March 30th, we have Spring Break with the Burro. We used to have burros plural, and we hope to have burros plural in the future. One of our burros unfortunately passed away in December. But we still have one, and we're going to still have Spring Break with him, so you can meet and greet another. Our next Heritage Lecture is going to be on Thursday, April 12th at 7 o'clock. And that lecture is going to be about modern-day gold processing. And we have a gentleman from Anglo Gold Ashanti, Jeff Hinton, who, Anglo Gold, if you're not aware of that company, they operate the Cripple Creek and Victor Gold Mine. So we're very pleased to have that gentleman. Also, in June, we have our Rock Fair from June 22nd to 24th. We run our stamp mill during that time frame. Our stamp mill is one of the few operating stamp mills in the country, and for those who are unfamiliar with what a stamp mill did, it basically pulverized the ore that was brought up from below ground, and they typically used mercury as a process to separate out the gold or silver from that. And our stamp mill was used to process silver ore in the Montezuma area of Colorado. Thank you, and thank you again for your support of the museum. Tonight I'm very pleased to introduce our 4 panelists on the topic of hydraulic fracturing. Our first speaker today is going to be Andrew Casper. Andrew is the Regulatory Counsel with the Colorado Oil and Gas Association. The Colorado Oil and Gas Association is an industry trade association with a mission to foster and promote the beneficial, efficient, responsible, and environmentally sound development, production, and use of Colorado oil and natural gas. As KOGA's Regulatory Counsel, Andrew's primary responsibilities include monitoring regulatory activity and coordinating industry response to proposed changes and facilitating industry committees pertaining to a wide variety of issues. With that, I give you Mr. Casper. Thank you. Our second speaker will be Scott Harvey. Mr. Harvey is a 28-year resident of Colorado Springs and a licensed civil engineer. Having spent many years working in power plants around the area, Mr. Harvey gained a unique understanding of the environmental attributes of these systems. He personally believes nothing has benefited our society and damaged our environment more than the energy choices. Scott has participated in the Colorado Springs Utilities Electric Integrated Resource Plan since 1995 and actively engages citizens and policymakers on energy issues. Mr. Harvey. Our third speaker will be Pam Zubek. Ms. Zubek has been a journalist for 33 years, having worked in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. She has covered just about every beat, but have focused largely on local government. Pam has won numerous awards, including 4 Public Service Awards in Colorado, the Associated Press Managing Editor's Public Service Award while working in Kansas, and most recently, the 2009 Gene Otto Friend of Freedom Award given by the Colorado Freedom of Information Council. She was with the Gazette for 16 years before joining the Colorado Springs Independent in September of 2009. And our cleanup hitter, so to speak, as he described himself earlier this evening, is Barry Noreen. Mr. Noreen is a 30-year veteran at the Gazette, writing 3 columns a week. He covered the legislature in 1982, 83, and 84, in addition to numerous statewide political campaigns. His father and grandfather worked in mines in Montana. He worked as a logger in Montana in 1973 and fought forest fires in Montana and Idaho in 1977. His interest in natural resource issues led him to becoming the Gazette's environmental writer from 1986 to 94. Mr. Noreen. Now, given that this particular topic can generate a lot of emotion, I should warn you, I am a high school basketball official here at Colorado Springs, and I have ejected coaches and players from games. And I will feel free to do that here. So please respect the opinions of our speakers here, as they will respect your opinion as well. The way we'll proceed is we'll go in the order as I described. At the end of all the presentations, we will then have a Q&A. So that will be opened up to the audience at that time, which I will moderate. Thank you again for coming, and we'll start with Mr. Casper.
Make sure I set my timer so I don't go long here. Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be down here to talk a little about hydraulic fracturing and oil and gas. I can't see what's on the screen up here. Maybe I'll move this. There we go. Just so we know what's going on. I'm interested in the talk in a few weeks regarding the gold mining. I've been staying up late recently and watching these shows in Alaska, the Fond du Lac, Alaska, with the gold hunters, the gold rush, and then the one where they get the gold from the sea, Bering Sea gold. They're very interesting stuff. And I think those would be interesting presentations as well. I'm not here to talk about that, obviously. I'm here to talk about liquid gold, right? No. Here to talk about something that's important to all of us in Colorado, as well as our country, as well as the world, and that's energy, and that's oil and gas. In Colorado, we are blessed to have an abundant amount of this resource. And I'm going to talk to you a little about the new ways that industry has been taking to extract this resource and how it's essentially the process of it. And I also want to clear up a lot of misinformation. I presume most of you live around this area, so if you have the newspaper, you probably write a little bit about hydraulic fracture, oil and gas. And so hopefully my presentation tonight will clear up some of the misinformation that has been out there and also generate some thoughtful discussion and discourse. So that's hence the title of my presentation this evening. So first I want to talk about where is that activity in Colorado? What do we have here? And that's going to be on the next slide here. We have a few different basins across the state. In the northeast, you have the Henry Julesburg Basin, which is home to. It's where the Niobrara, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, has been accessed most recently. You also have the Piceance Basin out west, which is in Barfield County and the western counties, and that's predominantly natural gas. Niobrara is more of an oil play. And the permitting that you see today and activity that you see today is reflective of the gas prices and the oil prices. I'm sure everybody's fearing what can happen at the pump in the next few weeks or few months. We've heard different reports about what's happening overseas and how that might affect our prices of stuff. And that, in turn, somewhat relates to the oil prices and the operators' activities in Colorado going after certain plays. Whereas natural gas prices right now are at historic lows. So right now you're seeing the permitting activity in the state reflect that. So I won't stick strictly to my presentation. The Niobrara, we just talked about, is a predominantly oil play. And this is kind of why there's been this buzz recently, because it's coming relatively near here. It comes out where Weld County is, and it comes all the way down the Front Range. If you go back up one slide. So these are all the different basins, and then the dots indicate the production, the permitted wells. And so as you can see, all the way up there, Weld County, they have the newest wells, and you'll see the permitting reflective of that. And there's been, historically, they've been very active, and now you see more activity as well because, as mentioned, you can access the Niobrara Formation from there, which is about 7,000 feet deep. So when I'm talking about hydraulic fracturing today, just picture it 7,000 feet deep. To put that a little bit in context, that's about 7 of the big red bank buildings downtown stacked up. And so that's how far down you're going. Maybe more. So why do we hydraulically fracture a well? Well, we increase the rate at which the well is capable of producing oil and gas. And most unconventional formations require that hydraulic fracture be done. And it doesn't increase the total reserves. So when I say most of conventional formations require hydraulic fracturing, it's because it's rock. You're talking about the dense shale material. So if you would just sticking a straw down there, you're not going to get anything. So you need to perf it a little bit, which means create some small cracks to enable the hydrocarbons to flow through the wellbore and up to the surface. And I have a good graphic coming up. So if you just confirm the activity, keep going. I guess it's the old version. So that's the Niobrara Shaft, the big spotlight. All right, let's keep going here. Okay, so this is a picture of a rock magnifying. Click it one more time. Oh, we don't have this. Oh, there we go. Is it working? Yeah. With the human hair, to put things in perspective. See, right now you don't see many holes in this rock, so you need to be able to perf that rock to be able to have the hydrocarbons flow out of it. So to put things in context, that's why this is necessary to access these unconventional formations. The Niobrara being one of them. We can keep it going here. We're talking about the drilling distance, the Wells Fargo building, all the way down there. You count 7 of them, I believe, or 10 of them rather. And then this is down here is where we're looking at, the Niobrara. Up here, these are the shallow drinking water aquifers, usually between 400 and 800 feet. And now, this water right here is not an underground lake, but it just flows typically through sand types of materials. So what happens, you go all the way down 7,000 feet through the hydraulic fracturing, and enables the fluid or the gases to come up and be produced. Now what you see where it comes over across, you see where it makes that little bending shape? That's horizontal drilling. And this new technology has enabled better productivity from this resource and makes it much more economical. It also reduces the surface impact. Because now essentially you go a mile down and a mile over, and you can hit something the size of a regular refrigerator through this room. So you can imagine how much that increases the pay zone, being able to go through that formation rather than just stick a straw directly into it. So that's the perforation gun, which is, again, deep down to the Niagara, typically about 7,000 feet. And when we were talking about the shallow drinking water aquifers, they're typically pretty shallow, but there's casing which protects it. And if you keep going, I'll show you the many layers. So here, this is what protects your groundwater, and it ensures that there's not communication between the well bore and any kind of your drinking water. We keep going. I guess with this new version of PowerPoint, we didn't capture all the great images and the graphics, but that's okay. We can still rely on my articulate voice and soothing manner, presentation style. And on that, let's keep going. There's a misperception that drilling is getting riskier. Look at this picture, Boulder Oil Field, 1903. This type of activity, oil and gas development, has been going on for more than 100 years in Colorado. Very historical past. And since then, we've been developing this resource with smaller impacts, and it's much safer. And as you can see, the Boulder oil field today, quite a difference. And I don't think it's just for the color photographs to you photographers in the room. So to bring it back to where we were talking about the horizontal drilling and why it's important. This is how much pay zone you're getting with the vertical well. As it follows, that's how much you're getting with the horizontal. Much, much more. And that makes it much more economic. And that enables companies and operators to get at this resource and produce it. And to give you another example, what used to take 32 wells to produce, the vertical wells can now only take one, from one well pad rather. And you can have multiple wells from the one well pad. So that clears up much more surface space to use. So hydraulic fracturing uses too much water in Colorado. Water is a very valuable resource. We've heard that time and time again. And that's just not true when put in context with other uses. Keep going. You can see the total withdrawals from other Colorado water users to put it in context. And hydraulic fracturing uses a very small percentage of the industrial activity. Total water usage statewide is almost 5 trillion gallons, which is a lot. And so if you look at the next chart, you'll see 0.08% state total. I'm sorry, that's not, it's not 8%, it's 0.08%. So the COGCC recently, which is the state regulatory agency, the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, they recently did a study, rejected water use, because horizontal wells do require more water than vertical ones, and to see what types of impacts that would have on Colorado's water supply. And what they came out was still a pretty low number of what oil and gas would be using as far as water, which is still 10% there. So there's another misperception: drilling activity increases property values. There's also that one too. So we talk about groundwater complaints here. Must have messed up my comments. But hydraulic fracturing does not involve injecting chemicals into your water well. And the COGCC, the state agency, has investigated hundreds of complaints, and they haven't had any verified instances of anything in Colorado. And since 2000, there's been a sampling program done in the San Juan Basin, which is not really near here, but it's important to demonstrate that there hasn't been any impact to water quality. And on that note, I should bring up KOGA's baseline sampling program. And we had over 93% of industry participation, the companies that are responsible for new well starts that have committed to test water wells pre and post drilling to demonstrate that hydraulic fracturing does not impact your water wells, and to increase transparency, really add accountability to industry. So if there's oil and gas activity, people think nobody wants to live there. That's not necessarily true when looking at other areas of specifically of the state. For example, in Weld County, it shows that it actually went up a little bit. And I'm going to make a lot of this stuff from my presentation available in a PDF in the museum. So if anybody wants further information and doesn't want to really read these graphs right now, I'm going to provide that. Another misperception, another thing that we've been hearing is that it's not regulated. Now, if oil and gas development wasn't regulated, I probably wouldn't have a job first. And also, it's kind of incomprehensible to think that it's not regulated. First, you have the state that has hundreds of regulations that govern every aspect, from siting a well, which is finding the location, to the production, to the final reclamation of the land, meaning to make it look pretty again, to plant the stuff, to plant the grass and the trees, whatever was there before. And that's just this is one of the regulations. Sorry, we're kind of jumping around here, but hopefully I can address more your concerns with my questions. But the 600 series rules govern setbacks. And what setbacks are is how far away the well can be from a structure or a building. And so there's 150 feet is the minimum, 350 feet minimum for high density areas. But 92% locations are at 500 plus feet, and 74% are over 1,000 feet. Of those are above 1,000 feet, rather. And it's important to also to think about these buildings are not necessarily homes. They could be outbuildings, they could be sheds, they could be what have you. But the COGCC considers that a building still, because there are buildings. So it's highly regulated, like we said. Everything needs to be done right. And that's, when you're talking about the process of hydraulic fracturing when you're drilling through the aquifer, there's requirements set by the state that ensures that it's extra protected. Meaning there's cementing and further casing requirements that have to extend a certain length beyond the deepest portion of the aquifer and around it as well. And also, it's interesting, should point out also that earlier this year, a few months ago, Colorado passed one of the most, if not the most, comprehensive disclosure rules in the country, which means that the fluids that are injected with the water fluids have to be disclosed publicly on a website that's called Frac Focus. And it goes the furthest from any other state because it actually requires the concentrations in it. It requires a searchable process with that. So other states only require MSDS chemicals. What's readily available on MSDS sheet? In Colorado, it's further than that to further add transparency. So if you want to know what's going into a well, you can look that up. and when you're talking about the fracking fluids as well, most of it's water. Over 95% usually is water, and only a small percentage is chemicals. And there it is. We keep going from there. Let's get some more pretty pictures. It's getting late. I'm not going to read all those rules. All right, talk a little bit about the industry right now in Colorado and what it provides to both the state and local economies. Right now you're seeing about 46,000 wells, active wells, which is 7th highest state natural gas production. I guess all my pictures got lost. I don't know. That's a good one. This creates $1.1 billion in public revenue and $9.1 billion in production value in 2010. And also, the industry is responsible for over 100,000 jobs, over 107,000 jobs. And when you're talking about the public revenue, 1.1 billion, you're seeing it from property tax, sales tax, royalty revenue, that's how it's broken up. So what COGA wants to do, what industry really wants to do is not be reactive. We want to be proactive in going out and educating the public. We put a lot of information on our website, and we've also tried to do other things like our baseline water sampling program and go out there and address issues to clear up any misperceptions. And I encourage everybody to take a look at this Frac Focus website to learn more about hydraulic fracturing and exactly what's used and what's occurring way below the surface. And you can actually locate a certain well and pull up what's in there. You're probably going to need to refer back to the glossary or do a Wikipedia search or something, because a lot of the terms are pretty technical and you might not be able to pronounce them. I can pronounce half of them. And we've also developed a lot of fact sheets, such as natural gas, produced water, truth about some documentaries. And we feel that by going out and engaging through education, we can have the public be more informed about our energy, about where it's coming from, how it's produced, and what we have here in Colorado. Because let's face it, I think we all probably drove here today. We're thankful that we can come home and turn on the heat on these cold Colorado nights. Thankful that it's just not magic when you flip the switch and the lights come on. Oil and gas is very important to Colorado, and natural gas powers our power plants. We have the liquids that help with our cars and a lot of other things that we use. And it reduces our dependency on foreign energy as well. So that's why it's important to really understand and appreciate what we have here in Colorado. And I look forward to your questions later on this evening, and I hope future you will access some more information that we can put out. And with that, thank you. I only went a little bit over. Sorry about the time.
My name is Scott Harvey. I'm licensed by the state of Colorado as a civil engineer. Most of my practice is in architectural engineering. I deal with buildings, and since 1982 I've done forensic engineering on buildings and why they fall down and why they have problems and stuff like that. So I'm always looking for problems and the solutions for them. And in my experience in the building industry, we learn from our mistakes of yesterday. And I think the same thing is true in the oil and gas industry. The rules that we have now, a lot of the rules are based upon problems that have come up. So as we progress historically through the timeline of this industry, it gets a little better. Let's do the video up here first. And I think that a lot of the oil and gas regulations are a bit arbitrary. For example, you saw that a facility could be put 150 feet from a building. But the rule actually reads 150 feet or 1.5 times the height of the drilling rig. They used to fall over, right? So that's where the 150 feet came from. And actually, could we turn off the lights by chance? Well, I'm going to start with this little video here right now. And this is an EPA video that shows testing with an infrared camera as to where gases leak from these things. A study at Cornell University shows that, and I think you can barely see that right here, little puffs of gas coming out and stuff. And you'll see these little puffs throughout. Cornell University did a study, and they found that the process of extracting natural gas is very dirty. See the little puff there and coming out the other side. And they concluded that if you include the process of extracting natural gas, it's actually dirtier than coal. Burning the natural gas is cleaner than coal, but the whole process is fairly dirty. And so if any of you live near one of these things, this is going to be a concern. Here's some pipe with some gases coming out of it and stuff like that. And although they're drilling for petroleum, gas, oil and stuff like that, sometimes there's gas as a byproduct of the process. And they don't necessarily do a good job of dealing with the gas because their focus is on the liquid, etc. So this is how they might use the infrared gas to find or the infrared camera to find a gas leak in a street and stuff like that. A big gas leak there coming out of the street. This video is only about 4 minutes long here. We'll get to some pictures of more. This is a big tank, and where oil is coming up out of the ground, and the lid on this tank goes up and down. And those little rods, those are not vents, those are rods that the lid rises and falls with, okay? And the gases just have to be leaking out from around the rods. In the process, we have things called condensate tanks and evaporators and stuff like that. And these are various tanks that are set on hillsides around after they've done the drilling. And here's actually an oil rig, and those are the gases that are coming out of it. And some of the gases include methane, ethane, butane, stuff like that. So, and these are tank batteries, as they call them. You get one tank or a cluster of tanks is a battery of tanks. This is how flying over with a helicopter they can show what sort of gases are leaking out of the tanks. If you're a downwinder, this is kind of problematic. If you have clusters of these facilities around your house, when the wind changes, you might always be a downwinder. We can cut that now and we can go to the presentation. I just wanted to show you that in Battlemont Mesa, over there in the West Slope in Garfield County, they have been doing a study because Battlemont Mesa is kind of a large lot residential sort of a community. And they have oil and gas drilling, pretty much natural gas drilling going on over there. And it's in a high density residential area.
Scott, you need your cruiser.
Remember the director it was in? PCC, oil, OG. In Battlemont Mesa, they've been doing this study, and the county kind of required this study because it was unknown. And with the study done by the Colorado School for Public Health, they concluded that most of the environmental or the health impacts associated with oil and gas drilling occurs from operations that occur above ground, not necessarily below ground. And to piggyback on what Andrew said, when they drill a well, they might start with a 12-inch diameter hole, and they might drill that down below on aquifer 50 feet or so, and then they'll stick a 10-inch pipe down in it, and they'll pump concrete, cement down there, basically cement and water, and to the bottom, and then push it under pressure down to the bottom, and then it comes up that little annular ring around the hole in the earth and the pipe, okay? So it push it down and it comes back up. And that's called cementing or completing the well. And one of the things that changed in 2008 when they changed the oil and gas regulations was they required the operators to use microwave type technology to send a probe down the well, and it would send microwaves out through the casing so they could find any voids in the cement, right? And as time goes on, we find that most of the problems with oil and gas wells occur from bad cementing of that well. And then, of course, there's another casing put in there, and that's also cemented in. So you kind of like have 2 or 3 layers of protection there. But if you have voids or air pockets in the cement, that's where the problems occur. So now that we have this rule that requires that they have the sound wave, the microwave device that goes down in there, and it's called, what's that called when you do that to the well?
You have the braided head testing that monitors the pressure, make sure that there's, is that what
The bond log, that bond log, that's the log that tells them how the cementing was done. Okay, so the bond log tells them whether they did a good job or a bad job. I don't really know how they go down there and fix a void in the cement after, the rest of it's done or whatever, but the technology's getting better. And most of the problems that you hear about, the contamination of well water and stuff like that, has to do with the cementing of the borehole and the casing and stuff like that. So as all of that gets better, did you find that? It's in that directory?
ONG?
Yep. Let me see the second one right there. So things are improving. And I don't really want to focus on what goes on below ground. I'll add to what Andrew said in that when they fracture a well, there's 2 purposes to that. One is to literally create fissures in the rock so that the product can get out, but they also send chemicals down there like acids and stuff like that that are roughly equivalent to priming a pump. It makes the oil or gas come to the surface of the crack. All right, so that's one of the purposes of the frac fluid, is to treat the soil, so to speak, so it gives up its gas a little bit easier. I'm a member of the Green Cities Coalition. I facilitate the Energy Working Group. We're kind of a citizens ad hoc group. We discuss oil and all sorts of energy issues, wind energy, solar energy, energy conservation, and stuff like that. Next slide, please. This is El Paso County. And this is the blue shaded area. That's the edge of the Niobrara Formation. These are aquifers, etc. Ultra has permitted 2 test wells right down here in the kind of east on Highway 94, I believe. Well, there's Highway 94 right there. And they've got some other permits going right here. And I don't know exactly where the Banning Lewis Ranch is right here, but I believe they have 2 permits submitted to the Oil and Gas Commission for the Banning Lewis Ranch area. Next slide, please. Regulations, they come from the Oil and Gas Commission, the Colorado Water Engineer. As Ultra drills wells, they're test wells, exploratory wells. They're trying to find out where the depth is, where the aquifers are, what type of soil it is, what sort of a chemical treatment they'll have to apply to the soil to make it give up its product and stuff like that. As I understand it, they're going down about 7,000 feet through layers of shale, and then there's a layer of clay stone, which is about 70 or 80 feet thick. And a geologist at UCCS believes that he was in the oil industry. He believes that would be the target zone, to go down to that layer and then turn horizontally and go through the softer stuff. Then they would hydraulically fracture out from that, which amounts to the gun that he shot. It's kind of a cylinder that was down in the thing. It actually is a gun that shoots out the sides of the barrel, so to speak. So they shoot little charges out there, which starts a crack, and then they will pump it up to many thousands of pounds per square inch pressure, which will create the crack going larger. There's some sort of a ratio, an engineering ratio. If you go down 7,000 feet, it's like 0.6 of that, so maybe you're gonna pump up the frac fluid, pump it up to about 4,000 PSI, consider, but they have pumps that will pressurize a well up to 12,000, 13,000 pounds per square inch. So although, you know, the target might be 4,000 pounds per square inch, if they go too much, they're gonna create a bigger crack. So there's a fine line there. When the county was looking at regulations, they kind of figured that there's 3 tiers of regulations. Tier 1 is the operational regulations on actual drilling, et cetera. And then the county can't touch those. The county wanted to have more water tests than the Oil and Gas Commission requires. They wanted to have, year 3, year 6, and then like every 5 years thereafter, and then 10 years after the well shut down, and another 10 years or something like that. So they basically doubled the water testing, not just in length of time, but also in the number of tests. The Oil and Gas Commission and the Attorney General said, no, no, no. And so they kind of backed down from that. The county's goals on a lot of its regulations, which I thought were pretty reasonable to protect the health of us people on the surface, I thought they were reasonable. The Oil and Gas Commission objected to, and so did the Attorney General, hence. So the county backed away from that. I understand that they're working on a memorandum of understanding, which I don't really know what that is. Maybe they'll work together. I don't know what the form of that is right now. Next slide. Tier 2 sort of regulations, the county has some latitude, like location. The county wanted it to be 500 feet from a facility, a building, a school, or whatever. And the Attorney General said even that was wrong. So I kind of object to that, and you saw the gases that came off of some of those facilities. And the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment did a study, and some of those facilities will give up anywhere from 5 to more than 20 tons of gaseous chemicals per year. And there was virtually no regulation on that. Right now, when you apply for what's called an APEN, a permit to release gases, there's this threshold of 39 tons of gas per year. If you go over that, your fee is different. If you stay under that, your fee is less. But the amount of gases that they can release through these processes is not very well controlled. They have a voluntary system to try and get them down to 5 tons per year. But if you have several of these around you, you're always going to be at risk, and you saw how the gases come out of those things. Next slide. The county has wide latitude in Tier 3 sort of regulations, roads and stuff like that. It might take up to 1,000 truckloads per well site to deliver the water, the equipment, the water, the frac fluid, take stuff away and everything. So there's an awful lot of truck traffic associated with that. Next slide. These are some of the rules, and as Andrew mentioned, the disclosure of frac fluid. These are little sentences I pulled out of the proposed regulation. I don't know what the final regulation came out at, but it didn't require, the proposed regulation didn't require disclosure of the trade secret chemicals. And what really struck me was it didn't require the vendor, the supplier, the operator to be responsible for the accuracy of the information supplied to the COGCC, which just flabbergasted me that you could, well, what's good is reporting something if you don't have to be honest about it. I don't know how that shook out with the final regulations. I read today, and the Rule 205A wasn't published on their online Series 200 sort of rules. So I'd like to think that the citizen outrage helped in eliminating that particular line item. It did not require the disclosure of chemicals that others did not disclose to him, or disclose the chemicals that are the byproduct of chemical reactions, which I think is kind of silly. It had a new rule that required operators to give 48 hours of notice before fracking, which, and I'll show you the importance of that later. The Green Cities Coalition group came up with some of the things that we felt were reasonable best practices. In 2008, you might have heard that the Oil and Gas Commission reconstituted under Governor Ritter, and instead of being 100% industry people, there was now some outsiders, etc. And what happened with those regulations, and some people in the industry call them onerous regulations, but I was watching Colorado State of Mind, that Friday night show on PBS, and there was an oil and gas man on the show, and he said that what was constituted was probably a bunch of best practices of the best operators. So it wasn't new stuff, they were just cherry picking good rules out of that. He also described how in 2008, the industry basically moved out of state, right? And some people will tell you it's because of the rules. But this fellow on PBS said, no, it's because the Marcellus shale formation in the Northeast became viable. And so natural gas as a commodity is a really high value back there. So it was much more profitable for them to pack up their drilling rigs and go to the Marcellus shale formation and set up shop. I believe that to be true. It was just kind of a matter of coincidence as to why they left. In a lot of cases where there's problems, I don't think it should be fair that a settlement should include a gag order. If someone's well or whatever gets harmed, oftentimes a complaint will be made, the owner will settle with the oil and gas operator, but there's a secrecy requirement. I don't think that's fair. They're required to post a bond to remediate a pad site. And I think that bond is somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000. I don't know how old that value is, but there's no bond requirement for protecting well water. Now, if the industry, in my opinion, believes that it can protect well water, why not offer a bond? There's other things, and I will stick on this. Truck routes, 500 foot setback. There's a lot of things that should be done. Next slide. This is some of the air pollution from trucks. If you have 1,000 truck trips per well, and this is what a fellow from Anadarko who presented to the Colorado Springs Oil and Gas Committee suggested 50 truckloads or truck trips or so to set up and take down the rig, about 16 truck trips to bring in the hydraulic fracking equipment and stuff like that. So the pollution from the truck trips per well amounts to 500,000 some pounds of air pollution per well. The amount of clean air consumed is 800 million cubic feet of air per well. Next slide. Air pollution from a drilling rig. It probably takes approximately 30 days to drill and frack a well. It can go plus or minus depending on how far horizontally they're going, etc. The rigs, 2,200 to 2,500 horsepower diesel, consume about 90 gallons of fuel per hour. If it ran for 30 days straight, you're talking almost 7 million pounds of air pollution per well. 208 million cubic feet of breathable air is, polluted. Next. I'm going to touch on earthquake activity. And just out of coincidence, the Oklahoma Geological Survey had 3 seismic monitoring stations set up around a well that was going to be fracked, just coincidentally. And so they did this study, and it was, I think, 2 years ago, or last year. There was 43 some earthquakes. Odd thing was the earthquakes didn't occur when they pumped up and cracked the earth. The earthquakes occurred when they released the pressure. Next slide there. We'll skip that one, but basically it was a vertical well. They fracked it 10,200, 8,800, 8,300, 7,600, etc. So they frack at the bottom, and a little bit shallower, and a little bit shallower, and a little bit shallower. So that was the goal. They sent the thing down there to shoot the sides of the well, and then they fracked it. Then after they fracked the lower part, they kind of put a temporary plug in above that, and they frack above that, and temporary plug and frack, etc. Next slide. So this is when they started right here, and this is when most of the earthquakes occurred. So look at out here and look at before. You can't say that the hydraulic fracturing didn't cause the earthquakes. There wasn't any earthquake activity beforehand or afterhand. Next slide. Here's the well right here. There's the depths that they were going to, but this is where the earthquakes occurred. And they're generally 2 miles away from the vertical well. And the green lines here are known fissures in the earth, etc. So although they intend to frack in a certain place, because of the fissures in the earth, it could go far distances. And that's one of our best practices is survey where the fractures are and don't frack near that, because then it's going to go elsewhere. If you have a fissure in the earth that's vertical, there's a good chance that you could communicate between aquifers, etc. I think this is 2 years ago, or maybe 2008, the parapet on Michael Garland's building just fell off on a Saturday afternoon at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Virtually all of our masonry buildings built prior to 1960 are unreinforced masonry buildings. Okay, so if we have earthquakes around here because of hydraulic fracturing, or even worse, injection of this, that, or the other, injection wells, we're going to have small earthquakes. And there's 50-some earthquakes on that previous slide. Some of them were very small, less than 1. But down in Trinidad this past summer, they believe that injection wells of produced water caused about a 4.5 earthquake. Hydraulic fracturing, they do this over the period of 2 or 3 days. The injection wells are often being done continuously. So you're basically pumping up the earth under pressure with a lubricant. So it stands to reason that you could cause an earthquake. On the other hand, though, suppose this process actually releases the stress in any fissures and causes lots of little earthquakes, but not a big one, and alleviates us from having a big one. It could be a good thing. All right, next slide. Battle of Mesa, this is over in Garfield County, and the Colorado School of Public Health concluded that there were no studies that document what a safe distance between natural gas wells and homes and schools and other places is. There's no studies. So any sort of a rule that says 150, 350, 500, or 1,000 feet, it's all arbitrary. There's really no studies. And one of their recommended, go back here one. One of the recommendations to the operator over there was use the best available technology to reduce air emissions from gas production sites. Now, some of the companies that do employ the best practices, it costs them money up front, but some of them are actually making money on the back end. One company reported that they made $35,000 profit off the installation of scavenger systems to collect the excess gases in there. Next slide. Some of the social impacts that they found over there, and I suppose they picked from information from the rifle area, increased crime, sexually transmitted disease, declining property values, and impacts on the educational environment. And also stress with people. I mean, if you have an oil and gas rig in your backyard, I'm sure it's not going to allow you to sleep very well at night. So there's people who have lived around these things, who have breathed in these gases, and after a certain point in time, they lose their taste, they lose their sense of smell and stuff like that. That's all documented in the movie Gaslit. Injection wells. This is, this could be problematic because produced water is water that comes up with the product. When they frack a well, they might use 5 million gallons of water or so. Anadarko says that they get about 30% of that water back. If you're pumping gas or water down in there and you have send $5 million gallons down there, and there's 1 million or 2 million that you get back, there's maybe 3 million gallons of water left. Well, what happens to that? It might come up a lot or quickly. It might come up a little bit at a time. So they're allowed under the federal government and the state of Colorado to do injection wells. Funny thing is though, when they apply for this, they have to document and inform owners within a quarter-mile radius of the well. In Colorado, the COGCC acknowledges that the typical length of a fracture created by these systems might be 1,000 feet. That's almost a quarter of a mile right there. If it travels through a fissure and then cracks the fissure more, it's easy that it could travel. You saw in the Oklahoma thing, they had earthquakes 2 miles away. So the quarter mile, it just doesn't seem quite enough. When they do when they drill a well and they case it, etc., to make an injection well, the rules actually says that they have to test the mechanical integrity of it, and to see if there's a significant leak. Well, if you're talking about benzene and things like that, what's a significant leak? You know, is it a gallon a day? Is it a gallon a minute? How close is your aquifer? Where's the leak in relation to your aquifer? I don't think this rule is quite strict enough. Next. Pits and liners, if they have produced water, what do they do with it, right? And they often will put it into a pit, a lined pit, perhaps a synthetic material, rubber, plastic, sort of, you know, we're talking very thick rubber. But sometimes they can use bentonite clay to line something. So when they do this, and they use a synthetic liner, they can actually just bury the liner. Just bury it in place with the surface owner's approval. If it's a constructed soil liner, they can leave it in place and effectively bury it. I don't believe there's any requirement that they mark truity where that is. It does say that they don't want water to come into that and it to create a hole where water will collect or anything like that. They want surface water to be able to, you know, get down past it and stuff. Next. Spills are kind of odd. Only a spill in excess of 5 barrels or 210 gallons has to be recorded. The odd thing is there's no aggregate limit. They could have a 5-barrel spill every day, and for the course of 30 days or however long, but there's no aggregate limit. And there's a reporting mechanism, this table right here, 910, and I'll show you what that looks like. Next, please. Produced water, that which what comes up with the product. This I find kind of disturbing. They can dispose of produced water by road spreading on leased roads outside of sensitive areas for produced waters with less than 5,000 milligrams per liter of total dissolved solids when authorized by the surface owner. Out there in Banning Lewis Ranch, they are the surface owner. So there's 18,000 acres which they could spread a lot on a lot of roads. The Southern Delivery System, which I'm sure a lot of you heard about it. We have the Williams Creek Reservoir, which is the top-end storage for the Southern Delivery System. Banning Lewis Ranch is in the watershed above that reservoir. So road spreading here could, you know, go into the thing. Now, they're limited to, road spreading should not result in cooling or finding a runoff in the adjacent soils, so meet the allowable concentrations, okay? So they put it on a road, it rains, the rain pushes the contaminants down into the soil, the next day they come spread it again, and so because of the rain, you're basically flushing it down. Where is it going? It's probably going down into a water table someplace, but it might not get to that water table for 5 or 10 years or something like that. Next. If soil contamination is suspected or known to exist as a result of spills or releases or exploration and production, waste management, and representative soil samples should be collected and analyzed. It seems to me it's an optional testing requirement. So you're allowed to put nasty chemicals on the ground, but it's optional as to whether you ever test as to whether you exceeded the concentration. Next. This is the allowable concentrations and organics in soils, organics in groundwater, inorganics in soil. And these are what's called BTEX, benzene, toluene, ethylene, ethylbenzene, xylenes, etc. And these are all, one drop of benzene will kill you. So these are very nasty chemicals. The acceptable limit for benzene is 1 microgram per liter. It's small, but if we're not testing, how do we know that we ever exceeded anything at all? Chlorides, they're pretty common. We get some of the deeper aquifers, the non-drinkable aquifers tend to have a lot of chemicals in them. Briny is a term that's used. They might have a lot of chlorides and stuff like that. They can be brought up to the surface, or they'll come up to the surface and they can be road spread. Next slide. These are the other things that we would see. We have radon in a lot of our decomposed granite west of here, elsewhere in town, and stuff like that. So there are radioactive elements that aren't really addressed in here that can be in groundwater or produced water, etc. Next. Some little samples. The Colorado College has a thing called the State of the Rockies report. 75% of Coloradans say that we should maintain protections for land, air, and water rather than reduce them in an effort to create jobs as quickly as possible. 63% believe our environmental laws are important safeguards to protect private property owners, public health, etc. And they don't view them as burdensome, they view them as necessary. Only 25% or 29% view environmental regulations as burdensome. 34% agrees one of the best ways to create jobs is to cut environmental regulations that are weighing down college businesses. So only 1/3 of Coloradans believe that we should chip away at regulations just to create jobs. Next. This is what happens to a barrel of oil. 40 gallons, 19 of it goes to gasoline, another 9 of it goes to diesel, and we have other heavy fuels, jet oil, other products, plastics. We have a lot of plastics, and nylon, and things like that, Kevlar vests. These are all have a lot of our agricultural products have a certain component of petroleum. Next. Now this is, I want to get on to perhaps a little bit off the topic. Who's heard of peak oil? Okay. The fellow by the name of N.K. Hubbard in the 1950s, he was a world-renowned geophysicist. He studied the Earth. And what he did was he plotted a chart showing the consumption of petroleum from 1900 to about 1950. He then estimated how much oil there might be in the world, all right? So how much oil there is in the world is represented by the area under the curve. So by knowing the first part of this graph and knowing the area of the graph, he could create a thing. When he first did his chart, it looked like this, okay? And look what happened in 1974. This is where efficiency kicked in. We've basically extended the life of our oil resources by using them more wisely. In 2008, James Woolsey, ex-CIA director, spoke at Colorado College. He stated then that in the CIA and the Department of Defense, they know this very well, that at that point in time, 2008, more than half of the world's oil-producing countries could no longer produce as much as they used to. Kuwait had just peaked. One of the reasons Halliburton moved over there, because now their refracking wells beat the band. Since then, the Contrella oil field in Mexico has peaked. So now we're looking at maybe 2/3 of the oil producing nations can no longer produce as much as they used to. About the same time, 2008, according to WikiLeaks, a letter from the Consular General in Saudi Arabia to Washington, D.C. describes a conversation with the Consular General and a just retired senior vice president / geologist for Aramco, the Saudi Arabia American oil company operating over there. This gentleman stated that Saudi Arabia has reached its peak in oil production. It'll probably have level production for maybe 10 or 11 years, and then it'll drop off, kind of like this. And also that Saudi Arabia may have overestimated its reserves by 40%. Okay? Now, let's not get into a discussion about when peak oil occurs, but consider this. If we have to make a change to different energy sources, is it going to be cheaper to do it here or here? I think we'd all agree that it's going to be cheaper to do it here than on the downside of that. And what does our economic picture look like when demand keeps going up and supply keeps going down? It's gonna go up big time, the cost of gasoline. You should study up on peak oil and see for yourself. A lot of oil companies are now acknowledging it. The Department of Defense knows this full well. They're trying to move away from petroleum-based products. They do not want to go fight wars for other people's resources. They've stated that very animately in some of the sustainability events that go on in Colorado Springs. Next slide. And that's it. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will have a slideshow. And I only have about 1 minute worth of advice, and that is, I'm not a public speaker, so that's obvious. But I would urge people to understand that if there was ever a time that you should do research on your own, now is the time. Because as you can see, there's a lot of varying opinions and data and all that sort of thing. And believe me, there's no shortage of information that's available. And I've put together this thing to sort of get you started, to see what's out there. There's a lot of organizations all across the country that have homeowners, landowners that have formed, and they've formed alliances, and you can go and find those websites and see what they're doing and how they do their research. EPA, you can actually, don't take somebody's word for what they found in Pavilion, Wyoming. Go to the EPA website and read about how they did the study, and so you can make up your own mind. You can, and I'm here to tell you that the state of Colorado is very serious about regulating this industry. And anyone who suggests that they're not serious about it is not very well informed, because they are very serious about what they're doing. And they conduct thousands of inspections. You can go to the Oil and Gas Commission website and see for yourself the kinds of infractions that are being penalized and how they penalize people or companies and such. And also, in the course of going through all of those things, you will find that there are many, I don't know whether it's a majority, but there are many companies that self-report. Many of these infractions that are discovered are self-reported by the industry. So I don't think the industry is out there to intentionally break the law, if you will. So I would just, that's my message for you, that's all. To just, don't be afraid to do your own research, because there's a lot of material out there, and there's no shortage of it. And that's all I have to say.
Howdy folks, I'm not an expert on technology or the law either. I'm not going to bill myself that way. As in the column, I come here pretty much with a point of view. Some of my fans out there have characterized me as being anti-drilling. I think I'm really not anti-drilling. But if you would define anti-drilling as to say that I think we don't need to drill absolutely everywhere in any place, then yeah, I am anti-drilling, if that's what the definition is. We can't drill in wilderness areas, and we can't drill in national parks, and most of the wildlife refuges, although they're trying to get those now. I think that there are, I'll probably get stoned for this, but I think there are a lot of advantages to fracking, and I don't argue with a lot of the things that Andrew said. The one thing that all of us ought to like about fracking is that when you do put a hole in the ground and you frack, it does do a much more efficient job of extracting the resource that's down there than the old techniques. And if you're gonna do it, then we ought to do it efficiently. That's a good thing. It's also true that because they go out horizontally a mile in circumference of the well, that the surface disturbance is much less than it used to be. Those old aerial pictures that you've seen of the Piceance Basin in Garfield County, those are natural gas wells where you see one right close to the other and then this web of roads in between them all. It looks horrible. That wouldn't happen here. But one of the flip sides of that the industry doesn't really want to say or talk about very much is that everybody thinks that there's going to be a whole lot of jobs here if we strike oil. Actually, one of the big benefits to the industry of fracking is that it's far less labor intensive and that there's fewer drill pads. And there's not going to be nearly as many jobs as there have been in the past with the old kinds of drilling. So if you're looking for a big job boom, it's not going to be like it has been. There will be some jobs, but it's not going to be like the old days. And here's a point that I want to make. I think this is a pretty important one. And I admit, they pay me to be a spin doctor, so you ought to take me with a grain of salt. The companies are not coming to El Paso County for energy. Get that out of your head. They're coming here for money. They're in the same business as the Gazette to make money. And that's what they're coming here for. If they were coming here for energy, they'd be interested in any natural gas that they found here. And I guarantee you, you heard Andrew say it, this is an oil play. Usually there's natural gas where you find oil. They're not interested in a natural gas field here. Other COGA folks met with us at the Gazette. Andrew wasn't there, but we asked them. They're not interested in natural gas because fracking has been so successful in the United States and around the world in finding new fields and developing new natural gas fields all over the world. The natural gas prices are in the toilet. They do not want to they're not going to develop a big natural gas field here. It's either oil or nothing. I wrote a column a couple of months ago. I'm for a dry hole. Because they'll be gone if they don't find oil. If they find natural gas, they are not interested in it. I promise you. I want to warn you, I'm a bit parochial. I'm a Westerner, been a Westerner all my life. I said I'm warning you, I'm not apologizing. And I've read a lot about our history here in the West. And they came for the silver and the gold. They came for the trees. I know all about it. I was involved in clear cuts when I was a kid. And they've come for the uranium. There's been a boom and a bust every single time. And what we're seeing now is not new. It's happened again and again and again. This time it's more of a global market. In the old days, it was just some big companies, usually from back east, who would come, get all the money, take it, and leave the hole in the ground. We call them Superfund sites. In Leadville, Salida's another mining one. Summitville you may have heard of, is more recent. These are all Superfund sites left to us by extraction corporations. They're here for the money. They're not here to build our community. They might donate to a couple of Little League soccer teams, but they're not here because they care about us. They're here to make money, and they're gonna take it and they're gonna run, just like they always have in the past. This is a point of view, but you know, I'm not going to go over fracking. I think you guys have heard enough about that. I do want to say this. When the COGA folks were at the Gazette, I asked them, I said, you know, wilderness areas, national parks, there's a number of places where you guys can't drill, but is there any place that you can drill that you wouldn't drill? And the answer was no. They told me no. They are not going to restrain themselves. The only people who are going to restrain them are us. in whatever way we can. And there are actually pretty limited ways that we can do that. But they are not going to restrain themselves. And they told me that. They were honest and told me, no. Is there any place you can drill that you wouldn't? No. One thing about the fracking fluid formulas, yes, we've required them to list the chemicals, but you know, so much of this stuff is happening on public land. Piceance Basin's almost all BLM land over there. You know who owns that land? You and me. I'm a co-owner of that land. And you know, all this public land, almost all of it's in the west, so I'm a western co-owner. And I owe it, and so do you. I would suggest I'd be so aggressive as to tell you what you owe. You owe it, and we owe it, to the future generations of co-owners of this land. You think that you could put a formula of some stuff down in there to make billions of dollars, and you don't have to tell us exactly what it is? It's crazy to think about that. They only did that because Dick Cheney got an exemption to the Clean Water Act. We all know that. We got to remove that. If you want to make billions of dollars, you should be able to tell us precisely what's in there. What Koga told me about that was, well, allowing each company to keep those formulas secret and proprietary incentivizes them to come up with these formulas and be competitive, and so they can always do better. And I told them, well, you're going to make billions of dollars out there doing this. I think that's incentive enough. Just a point of view. I'm not saying you can disagree with it. It's a point of view. I admit it. And you did touch on a little bit about beyond drilling and what's happening in the world. Ken DeFaze wrote a book. He was a protege of MK Hubbard's, and he wrote a book called Hubbard's Peak, and he applied Hubbard's methodology to the world. And it's rough estimates because it depends on world oil production and use. Consumption depends upon a little bit on the economy. We've been through a big recession, so production's down a little bit. Consumption's down a little bit worldwide. So, but right about now, or in the next, between now and the next 5 years, believe it, world oil production is going to peak. And ever after that, it will gradually decline. It's a fact. This is going to happen. It doesn't matter that we found some new fields offshore Brazil, because all of the existing fields that we've been pumping are depleting rapidly. And at the same time, the third world, China's the third world country, 95% of it. The third world demand is skyrocketing. So we are peaking in world production. MK Hubbard, I believe, said that we would. He predicted that the U.S. production would peak in 1970.
69.
Fact is, it was 1972 is when it peaked. We've produced less oil every year since 1972. You can look it up. You know, it's a fact. And the world is not making any more oil. We're burning more of it all the time, but we're not making any more of it. We should start thinking about whether we should throw troops into the fray. Yeah, that's my point of view, for a declining resource. And we should think about whether, locally, we should think about how much it's worth to put up a 150-foot drill tower right next to somebody's land who's, you know, got a nice view of Pikes Peak, and now they're going to have a view of Pikes Peak with a 150-foot drill tower in front of it. And with trucks going up and down the roads every day. Don't tell me that doesn't decrease the value or the quality of somebody's life. Of course it does. You can't put a price on it. Now, as far as fracking and the risk, sorry, fracking folks, statistically I've read about it, it's not a high risk. And I'll agree with Andrew on that. But I would add, the old H.R. Holdeman quote is that once you do make a mistake down there deep, you know, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's really hard to get it back in once you got a mistake down there. So statistically, it's true. Fracking doesn't create very many problems on a statistical basis. But when you have one, you really have one. And again, we're, in terms of our national security, we should be getting away from oil. In terms of our local community values, it's not gonna do us any good. You know, what did it do for West Texas, you know? So, that's about all I have to say. Is I come from a point of view, I'm not bashful about it. You don't have to agree with it, I'm really used to being in the minority all the time.
Do we have a hand for all of our presenters?